let's get scratching.
We got an explosive broadcast coming to you. Listen up. Sega games, just keep playing them.
We're back. It's the SEGAbits Swingin Report Show live. Get ready for Sega interviews and news. Hello and welcome to the SEGAbits Swingin Report Show live. I am Barry. And joining us on this, our 100 and somethingth episode, is a very special guest. She's been on before back in 2015, and she is back. So without further ado, let's bring her on and introduce her. It is Liesel Wilkerson. Hello.
Hi, Barry. It's great to be back. I can't believe it's been so long.
I know, right? It's wild. So, you know, for you watching in the YouTube audience, we're starting a little late. We had some audio issues, but hopefully we solved it. So if you're in the comments, if you hear any echo, just let us know. Okay, they're hearing a little bit of echo. So let's see what I can do. I didn't want to do tech support while we were doing it. But let's see. Well, here's what we'll do. First off, I'm going to play. If you don't mind, there was a reel that you had going on your website. Can I play a little bit of that, and then we'll get into the interview? Awesome.
Of course, yes.
All right, here we go.
Welcome to sunny LA. Movie Plus のレポーターのリーソレです。
Yeah, nice to meet you. こちらの美人の2人はですね、フエラーというデザインブランドの、デザイナーの2人です。サラさん、どうサラさん
Who are you?
あ、私日本語喋れます。
で、どちら様？
あ、私プロフェッサー小山田のメイです。
メイ？リアリー？お飲み物は何がよろしいですか？
渋めの煎茶でお願いします。私お茶にうるさいんですよ。
おはよう。
胸張るおじさん。
んだ少し予定が早かったんじゃないのかね。
あ、エリおばさんに会いたくて、今日おじさんのところに泊まってもいいですか？
もちろんだよ。女房もきっと大喜びだ。しかし。
ということは、教授の奥さんアメリカ人ってこと？アンビリーバボー！
尾形先生、オペを見学させてください。
どうぞ。
ピョーン。ハイテンションですね。グッドです。私もオペ中ハイテンションですよ。because 出力がアップします。
Yes, that's right. I am Nova.
おー。で、杉坂先生は何をやるんです？ノリが悪いですよ。オペはノリです。ノリ。
イエイイエイ。
さすが尾形先生ですね。噂通りのオッドハンド。杉坂先生、もっとドライブしなさい。
でもこの体勢じゃ。
そんなノリじゃアメリカではできませんよ。杉坂先生、ナイス。やっとなってきましたね。イエーイ。先生、ベリーエキサイティングなオペでしたね。
Thank you.
ナナコもとてもエキサイティングでしたよ。あのノリだとアメリカでも十分にやっていけますよ。どうも。
And so I had a great time. I had a very good time.
Excuse me, aren't you Bob Harris?
Yes, I am.
Wow, I'm such a big fan. It's
Thank
so
you very
nice to
much.
meet you.
Nice to meet you
What are
too.
you doing here in Japan?
I have to go right now. Excuse me one second.
さて、今週のレッスンナンバーはなんと名曲です。いつも通りにかっこいい曲選んでます。The Righteous Brothers の Unchained Melody。Do you know this song? かな？もしかしてゴーストの曲かな。そうですね。ゴーストでは有名になったんですよね。そう、やっぱりそういうふうに思ってる人がすごい多いと思うんですけど、すごいもうこれは1960年代の曲です。Here I am at a place called Ameoko. Now Ameoko.
Okay. All right, and we are back. that was just a sample of what you can do and have done. We fiddled around with the audio a little bit, so now that we're back, let us know if everything sounds good on your end. Liesel, can I hear you speak for just a moment, and then tech support will be complete, hopefully.
Okay. Dr. Linda, yo. Naughty, naughty. Can you hear me?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh my gosh. I laugh every time I hear Dr. Linda.
So you need to tell me, I mean, so first off, people know you very well from your work with, at least the audience we have, with Sega games.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Shenmue Ii, I think, is probably your most popular Sega game. But of course, you have also done a lot of fighting females in many different games, both, well, within Sega, it's been Sarah Bryant. Outside of Sega, can you let me, give me an idea?
So there's another little game I did with Sega as well, Crazy Taxi, where I was yelling at cars as the character Gina. So that was a lot of fun. But as far as Tekken characters, which I guess would be the other big characters, it would be Nina Williams, Christy Monteiro, and Zafina. So I've done those three. I've also done, I've done so many old school games though, like Rumble Roses. A few months ago, I was actually at a convention and someone brought something from Rumble Roses, and I was like, "What? Where did you get this?" It was like listening to Dr. Linda again. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in a different universe." But it's always, so much fun when you see some of those old school projects that you've been a part of, and people bring them over to get them signed or whatever. That's always so much fun for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been doing video game voice acting in, I would say, the 2000s predominantly.
Yeah.
And you made a brief return for, I believe, Shenmue 3. For a cameo, but you wouldn't consider yourself like voice actor first. I feel like your main focus is interpreter.
Yeah. So one thing I've realized about myself over the years is I'm the kind of person where I'm not satisfied with just one job. I know a lot of the other voice actors, of course, from going to conventions with them and whatnot, and there are a lot of them who, that's all they do, that's all they want to do is voice acting, and that's absolutely great. And, more power to you for that, but I am I don't know, it's just my personality where I like to do different kinds of things. And when I was moving to the States around 2008, 2009, I wanted to kind of switch things up and do other work. And interpreting has become something that I've been doing a lot of. And it's extremely challenging and touches on a lot of different aspects, I guess, for me that I always considered weaknesses. And so I've really had to work those a lot, and that's been really fulfilling for me. But I also do a lot of work with producing. So I help with guest bookings for other conventions and other events. I do consulting for Japanese clients. I do a lot of, I've really started to do a lot more of that, and I really enjoy that, I think.
Now, you have, the main reason I wanted to bring you on is you have a new podcast. It's called Adventures of a Blonde Geisha. There are 2 episodes
Yes.
up right now.
Yes.
There is Welcome to Candyland and Bilingual. I
Yes.
have listened to both. I love the show. I love the format.
Thank you.
I typically, my podcast listening is like super polished politics podcasts.
So very different from
And like
yeah.
and then like the typical daily news stuff. And then some entertainment things like like movie stuff. But I've never really listened to one like yours that I think kind of fits more like a almost like a blog format or an audio blog, where
or like a storytelling, I guess, aspects of it too.
yeah. But
Yeah.
what really impressed me is that you can sit in front of a microphone on your own and talk for a good 20 minutes, and it's not meandering. Like there you're a very good storyteller is what I'm trying to say, and as you can tell, I'm not the greatest storyteller because I'm kind of stumbling over my words just to describe storytelling, but I just think it's a fantastic first 2 episodes. I'm really looking forward to hearing more of them.
Thank you.
And so usually we do the plugs at the end, but I just want to let everyone know they can check
Yeah.
out Adventures of a Blonde Geisha out right now. 2 episodes, more to come. It's on all the major ones, but right now I've found it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. So if you're listening to this right now, click on over, subscribe, give a positive review, because once you listen to it, I think you're going to want to leave a positive review. So it's warranted.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the the podcast thing. It's interesting because I've been talking about doing a podcast for a very long time. I don't know why, but I've just had some of the craziest experiences in my life. And of course, a lot of it is because I was living in Japan during such an incredible time with music and with entertainment and voice acting and all that. So I've just got so many funny and entertaining and crazy stories that I want to tell. But then also, I really wanted to touch on this whole thing about being a third culture kid, right? That's kind of the theme, one of the themes of the podcast. And for me, I don't really fit in, obviously, to Japan, like being the 6 foot, well, I'm not 6 foot, I'm actually 5'10", but same deal. But, so being a really tall blonde American girl, I never fit in to Japan. But then coming to America, I never really fit in here either, and I still don't, even though I've been here for now 13 years. I still always feel different, and I kind of wanted to touch on that because I think that there are a lot of people out there who might feel different, even if they're not third culture kids, or even if they have just one culture. And so part of my thing is it's okay, we're all out there in all sorts and forms and whatever, and and I do enjoy storytelling a lot. Coming from radio where I would talk to myself, even though I had an audience, obviously, but, I would be alone in a DJ booth for hours and still somehow found, a way to entertain myself. So I thought maybe I can do it, but it took me a long time. I was really, I don't know what it was, but I was very intimidated by the fact, by just doing this whole podcast thing, because it's so personal to me, the content, and, maybe it's a little bit about personal rejection. No, you guys don't love me. No. I don't know what it was, but I just wouldn't, I just kept talking about doing it, not doing it. And then finally in January of this year, I was like, nope, we're doing it. We're absolutely doing it. And I don't care. I'm just starting to put myself out there. So, so far I'm really happy with it. And it's really been a lot of fun to kind of sit. And also, I will say, Barry, I don't have a nice setup like you do. My air quotes.
Oh, please.
Studio, my podcast studio is my closet in my bedroom, which has a treadmill in there, which has never been used. Also got some big luggages in there, which I use all the time. And an air conditioner so once it gets warmer, it'll be a little less crowded, but
Yeah.
needless to say, it's like a game of Twister, like going into my studio and doing this. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, but to make you feel better, as you saw when you jumped on here, we did have a little bit of an audio issue, and that's because I am juggling on my end. I'm juggling so many things. I actually have to physically plug in. There's a cable running behind me that I typically don't have. To my Wi-Fi router, I have to close doors, turn off things, lower light levels, put screenshots up, and have videos, ready at the ready. And sometimes I'll sit down and I'm all ready to go, and I forget one of those things, and it just throws me off my game for the entire show.
Yeah.
And in your case, it's great because you're sitting down and you're just hitting record and talking.
Yes.
And so I kind of envy you in that regard.
Thank you. I mean, I will say, though, there is a wild card, and that would be, you guys can't see, but this cute little kitty, one of my cats that is, actually sleeping soundly right next to me right now. For whatever reason, when I start recording the podcast, all of a sudden she's like, meow, meow, and she's like, yeah, she has the loudest meow. And,
Oh, boy.
I mean, it's been okay, but yeah, I have had to re-record because, she's like, oh, okay, you want to do something where you have no noise? Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, well, my cat's 16 years old, so we just throw a bunch of food in her, and she's done for the night. So it's pretty good. But she has been quite the annoyance in the past. But going back to your show, then,
Yes.
it really feels like you're almost reading an autobiography, because you lay the foundation in the beginning, and then you kind
Yes.
of walk through your story. And so we're too deep. You haven't touched on. You've hinted at your roles in video game voice acting, your role on Lost in Translation. And we actually, I recall, I didn't re-listen to it, but we talked a lot about that in the past, back in 2015 when you were on. In fact, I think the most notable thing we talked about that gets cited time and again, and it's been on a few wiki entries actually, is our discussion about, I think it's Yuan from Shenmue Ii,
Yes.
who, I think by all accounts, is the first trans character in video games. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe they throw in, I feel like maybe in the past, maybe 80s, 90s, they might have thrown in characters as a joke. But this one, it's more like they just happen to be, and it's not really touched upon or treated humorously outside of maybe that the two main villains are actually a couple. And so that was a very interesting conversation. But there were some areas in your Sega voice acting that I don't believe we touched on. So I did want to touch a little bit on those. And then I also had some questions that came up from listening to your podcast. So Virtua Fighter, you have played Sarah Bryant in Virtua Fighter 5. But your first Virtua Fighter role was actually a year before that, I believe, in Virtua Quest. Now, Virtua Quest, I've not played it, but I've watched videos of it. It's more of a action adventure game where the Virtua Fighter characters are kind of there as assistants. How do you remember how you came about working on that game? Was it just through your previous work with Sega? Were they looking for someone with more of a more narrative-driven voice acting experience rather than a fighting game voice? Do you have any recollections on that role?
Not really, honestly, but the Virtua Fighter work that I've done, all comes through the same agent. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, and she's one of my favorite people to work with in Japan. I've actually done a lot of other like commercial work with her and whatnot. But she would, for the Virtua Fighter work, she would call me up and say, okay, Liesel, they need you, or they need your voice, or they need the okay to use your voice. And so that's kind of, where it ends. I mean, I don't really remember, unfortunately. I wish I did, but I don't know. It's kind of a long time ago, so I don't remember.
Well,
Sorry.
I mean, understandably so, because Virtua Fighter 5, for fans of the game, it's famously like the most re-released new version Virtua Fighter game in history. We've come to the point now where they were teasing a new game, and it turned out to be another iteration of the game. Right? Yeah. And then on top of that, the game will appear in recent games as a game within a game. So do you receive any like contact from your agent when that comes up? They're using the game again? No. Okay.
Yeah, no. And I don't even, no, they don't let us know. So the only way I find out really about that kind of thing would be through people contacting me, fans, or, reach out to me on social media, and they're like, oh, I just saw you on so-and-so game. I'm like, what? But, once more, I think this is in a way, in this way, I have to say this is one thing about the entertainment industry in general, but then just like a lot of the work, especially coming from the era or whatever, the time when I started doing it, where you really had no idea what was coming out, when it was coming out, and you kind of had no control over the situation. And so I've learned to not be irritated or frustrated, when I hear something like that, right? It's just like, oh,
Right.
yeah, okay, cool, that's great. I mean, you kind of have to pick your battles. So, but obviously nowadays it's very different, because the people that do voice acting, and and that's all they want to do, like they have to constantly be using social media to promote it, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on. But back when I started doing voice acting, there wasn't IMDb, and there wasn't a lot of these tracking tools, and having done it in Japan as well, and I'm sure that if you've talked to Eric Kelso as well, that you've probably heard this, but we were given very, very little information about any of the games that we did. Now, Shenmue was a big difference, but usually they don't tell us. And so I'm still, to this day, I'm getting a lot of people who approach me at events, and they'll say, I'm sure this is your voice, can you listen to it? And I listen to it, and I'm like, yeah, could be, I don't know. I mean, I know I've done a lot of work over the years, and then just what's out there on IMDb, but I have no idea what it is. So once more, something I can't control.
Yeah, it's fascinating, because we have had voice actors on the show in the past. Some who it's all they do. It's their bread and butter. They're out there doing the contract disputes and holding off, for more money. Roger Craig Smith, the current voice of Sonic, was on our show, and he actually was announced to be leaving the role, and then 6 months later he was announced to be returning to the role, despite the fact that no one voiced Sonic between them. So he was the first Sonic voice actor to have the role twice in a row, just because he officially left and returned. Yeah. And then there's been other people we've had on where I'll say to them, you've done the voice of these two characters, and like, well, yeah, I designed the game, and I just happened to be around, and I had a good voice. Someone said, why don't you do the announcer voice? And now I'm the voice of Midway's Hydro Thunder, the barker at the arcade telling people to come on over and jump on a boat and go for a race. And then there are the ones who, and I think you kind of fit into that category, where you have a focus in a lot of different things, but you have an excellent voice, so of course you're going to want to take advantage of that and put yourself out there for voice acting roles. But I don't get the sense that you are, I don't want to say precious, you are what's the word I'm looking for? Like almost like maybe spiteful, or you know what I'm saying? Like if someone comes on and starts to do the character, a great example of this is the Shenmue anime is going on right now.
Yeah.
Was there an effort on your part to ever try to get the voice acting role on the anime for Joy, or was it just kind of like, because they changed, it's a whole new cast, I think, for everyone.
It's a whole new cast. And and I think that it's also got a very different feel to it. So, and I mean, honestly, I do think it would be really weird if, just one person was on there. And I mean, even though Shenmue 3, obviously, I came back, but of course Corey was back, but I was the only other person to come on from Shenmue 2. But I don't know. I knew that Shenmue, the anime, would probably head in that way, and it's totally fine. I think that, it's just like how you see remakes of classic movies, or, you always have different interpretations of the same story.
Right.
And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not, and at the end of the day, I mean, I feel being in the entertainment industry for a long time, because it'll be almost 30 years now, I mean, I started working in radio at the age of 18. So I've been I've been in this industry for almost 30 years. And I've learned that, as I mentioned before, you have to pick your battles, but also, there's so much that you have to fight anyway with what's going on with the entertainment industry. Like, and you just don't want to put out bad energy, or it's right. I don't know, that's just not me. Like, I just don't do that. I don't like to do that. And I'm all about sharing the love, I guess.
The one thing I found really interesting, I think 3 episodes of the anime has been out now, is that it is an anime adaptation to the point where, and no offense to you and the other voice actors from the game, but I almost prefer to have like people who have worked heavily in anime working on the show, just because it's almost like if you're going to see the stage play of a movie, it's kind of exciting to see the new cast and the new people who are, Nathan Lane, like people are like, oh, I'm going to go see the Broadway show and Nathan Lane's there. That's someone who kind of crosses over between the two, but he just came to mind because I was watching an interview with him recently. But like,
I love him.
Yeah, there are stars. What I'm trying to say is there are stars in Broadway that you would be very excited to see take on a role, and so it is fun to watch Shenmue hear these new voices, but they are emoting and acting in the way that is typical of anime, as opposed to I guess I'd say like the Sega voice acting, especially in the 2000s, which has its own flavor, and it's I don't really know how to describe it. It's I don't know how much you've seen of modern video game voice acting, but it is much more
very different.
It's very theatrical. They do bring on some celebrity voices from time to time. I think George Takei was on a recent Sega game. I could be wrong. Yeah, he was. And it's almost like watching a film. Whereas I feel with the Shenmue games and the English versions, it was just a gameplay mechanism to impart information onto the player. And it almost seemed right to pick actors who can enunciate, deliver dialogue clearly, because they're giving instruction to the player for a large part of the gameplay. Now there are of course, cinematics. But I mean, by and large, Shenmue is a lot of conversational dialogue. And so I'd have to imagine you don't want to get an actor who's going to get behind the microphone and just be like, I want to have fun with this. I'm going to go really crazy, see where I can take this. And it's kind of like, can you just please read the script because we've got an entire branching dialogue tree, you know?
Yeah, well, and also I think that the whole thing about recording in Japan, that's unfortunately, that's kind of what you get too, is you're not given very much freedom at all, you know, with scripts or with characters. Or I think the only time really that I had any kind of freedom to do anything was when I was recording, was it the first time? I think, yeah, when I was recording Nina Williams, and I went into the studio, like I, you know, came to the studio. At that time I was doing a lot of boxing, right? So, and I used to just go everywhere on this pimped out mountain bike that I had, which was black and red and was super awesome. And, you know, a furry leopard print seat, and it was just the jam. And so I literally came from, I just finished doing boxing with a personal trainer, and I came out to record for Nina Williams. And so I had my boxing gloves with me, actually, and they were these really big, I think they were like 14-ounce gloves. They were really big, and, you know, of course, leopard print. So as I'm pulling up to the studio, the people, you know, the client was coming up, and they were like, "Oh, Lisa-san!" Like, they were just blown away. They were like, "Who are you, Chikorita?" Like, it was so funny. But they were like, "Oh, you are like Nina Williams," you know. And it was, and I remember that, and it was funny because that I don't know. I think it was a very I think a very impromptu thing, but they're like, "Oh, we want to hear lines that you would use personally, you know, some things that you would say." And so I remember like writing down some and then recording and then, you know, doing all that. But other than that, really in Japan, when you're doing voice work, you don't really get an opportunity to have very much freedom or to play around with things too. Well, I mean, you know, nowadays it's probably a little bit different, but still, I think that if you're doing English voice acting in Japan, you still don't really get that opportunity a lot. Yeah, and you know, maybe the language has something to do with it too. I don't know. But then, of course, you know, you see. Like I've interviewed a lot of the big seiyuu for Japanese, you know, for anime, like some of the people from DBZ, Dragon Ball Z, and One Piece, and, you know, like Attack on Titan, and a lot of these really big Japanese seiyuu. I've worked with them at various anime events or Comic-Con events, and one of the things that they say too is that depending on the director, you are sometimes allowed to play around a little bit and to ad lib with anime, right. But a lot of times not a lot of times, but, you know, more often than not, you are encouraged to really just go by the script. But yeah, I guess it all depends.
In the world of like video game voice acting and the directors, sometimes it's the game director themselves, like with Yu Suzuki, who's a little more in control. Other times it's, you know, a voice director. Because, you know, if the work is being done in Japan and they have a loose grasp on the English language, do you think there's something where they hear the words being read, it sounds correct, it seems to impart the information that they think English speakers will need, and that's good enough, especially in the past where it was less cinematic and it was more, this is a video game, we're not making a movie here.
And exactly. And I think that's part of it. I think there's also working with Japan in the business culture, it's a very similar thing where they don't like to make very many changes. They like things to be the way they are on the script a lot of times. Like that whole white space, the whole notion about just, doing whatever, they're not very comfortable with that. And this is not just with voice acting. I feel like it's with, I deal with this with my interpreting clients a lot as well, where they get really nervous if just one thing goes off, then it's like all of a sudden panic mode. And, but once more, not everyone is like that. I've also dealt with a lot of great clients, Japanese clients, who prefer to be in this kind of white space where they don't know what's going to happen. Let's let it just go organically. But that is much rarer, I think,
right,
in Japanese culture, period.
Yeah. We have another podcast where we just talk about a Sega game or a game connected to Sega each episode. And there is that very rare game where you're like, this came out in 1995 and the voice acting is fantastic, and more often than not, the director behind it is someone who's gone on to make multi-million-dollar games, so they definitely knew what they were doing. They weren't treating it so much as dispensable, I guess, where they were just like, people will play this, they'll move on. But there's also that level of fandom where they like that quality to the acting. They almost look for it. When Shenmue Ii came out, I think there was almost this fear from some fans where it might be too slick, where they would hear the voice acting and it would feel like too far of a jump. Even though it's basically starting right after the second game, because of the time jump through production, you would be having these characters who all of a sudden would be coming out of the cave talking, super eloquently. It's almost like you're watching, a film or seeing a video game created in 2017 as it was. So there is that. With your work then in Virtua Fighter, how much time would you say you have spent collectively in the studio as Sarah? Would it have been just like a one and done for Virtua Fighter 5, or did you come back for the subsequent releases?
I know that I've gone into the studio 2 different times for Virtua Fighter, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Would it have been Quest and then 5, maybe? Something like that?
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, man. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I don't know. But yeah, I guess, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I wish I could say I remember.
It is pretty fantastic, though, because, you've done this voice work as this character relatively small amount of time in your life, but it has really, I think a large part of your fan base is the Virtua Fighter fans outside of Shenmue, and so it's just kind of fascinating to see that you just do a small little bit amount of work and it makes a huge impact on a lot of people. Famously, Mike Pollock, who does the voice of Dr. Eggman for the Sonic games, people will come at him with every single question, and he has to say sometimes, like, look, I know you love these games, you probably hear my character's voice every day, but for me, I'm voicing this character probably once a year. Like I'm going to the studio for the next big game, and then you're playing the game every day for the next few years, and for me, I'm doing other work. He gets a little crotchety about it, but it is a good point, because it's this interesting thing where the voice actors will have slight recollections, whereas the fans will be like, I've heard your voice every day. I replay this game constantly. It's kind of a fascinating fan base, because unlike, say, television or film, people will play characters for years, and that's how you keep up with them. Whereas video games, they have this replayability factor, And so you will have these fans who, glom onto you, but for a relatively small amount of work on your part. It's just, it's very interesting to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. Looking at Virtua Fighter 4 was my first one. Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution. I think that was the first time I went into for so I do remember that. So I do remember the 4 and the 5.
All right. So
I
that
think
is,
those would be the main ones, I guess.
Okay.
But, but and also kind of to piggyback of what you were saying, this is something that a lot of times I will bring up, or sometimes one of the other voice actors will bring up, is that one of the things that is extremely important, and I touched on this kind of a little bit earlier, but when you're doing voice acting, or when you're in the entertainment field, where you're going through auditions all the time and you're putting yourself out there all the time, you're constantly having to continue the hustle, So say, for instance, I go in and record something that's great and wonderful, but then of course, because it's in Japan, I have no idea of what it is, no information, but then you kind of do sometimes forget about it until it gets released. And even then, you don't know when it's going to be released, right? A lot of times. And so there's something, I think, like I want to say probably a lot of voice actors and actors, actresses, just people in entertainment who are doing this. Like, you put everything you have into that moment and do your best, but you can't dwell on that moment for a long time, because you don't even know if that thing that you worked on is going to be coming out, or so you have to, it's almost like a survival skill, I think, that you have to have, because you just have to keep pressing forward and doing more and more work. Unless you're like Mariska Hargitay and you do Law and Order SVU, which is my guilty pleasure, but I mean, with that, it's like, oh, season 20, yikes. But yeah,
and you never know what will blow up too, because for example, Crazy Taxi, a relatively small amount of voice acting. You had there's actually a YouTube video online where it's just the audio clips, and so you can sit and just listen to every single thing you and everyone else said. It's very fun. But then something like that could have very much blown up, and it did with 1 through 3. But there was actually at one point, Richard Donner was going to direct a Crazy Taxi movie, and so if you can imagine, if that actually went ahead, your character that you voiced could have very well have been in the early 2000s a character in a movie. It's just kind of by Richard Donner of Superman fame. It's kind of wild how these things blow up. And by and large, like, you've got this kind of Midas touch, because I feel like every little minor Sega role that you started out on has blown up into a pretty big franchise, between Shenmue, Crazy Taxi, coming in towards the end of Virtua Fighter, but fingers crossed they do a 6 and they bring a lot of the voice cast back. Too.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. And I mean, I guess when I think of it this way, it's not just Sega stuff, I guess, because also in Lost in Translation, I have this role where I have two, I have like speaking lines with Bill Murray. So I have two scenes with him, but it's crazy to me how it's still a minor role. But I have had so many people reach out to me and say, "Oh my gosh, you were just amazing," and I'm like, "Really? I was barely on there, but okay." I mean, so yeah, maybe that's kind of what I do. I just go in, do my magic for a few seconds.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Your character's name, isn't it Sexy Businesswoman?
Oh yeah, it was. I can't
Yeah.
even begin to tell you, Barry. So, and this is another thing. Like, I actually have such an amazing story with that film and with
Yes.
Sofia Coppola, right? Because it starts even before I got cast in that movie. I'm not gonna tell it yet because it's one of my favorite stories to tell.
Save it for your podcast. Yes.
Yeah. And even then, I'm gonna have to. I'm like, when do I tell that story? Because it's so fabulous. I really love. I mean, you just kind of can't make it up. And I'm like, how does this stuff happen to me? Who even knows? But yeah, the sexy businesswoman. Oh my gosh, it's so, because of course, like I'm waiting in the in the green room or whatever to be called, and then when it's time for my part, my lines, they're like, bring on sexy businesswoman, they're kind of like yelling, and everyone's like, who thinks she's sexy businesswoman? And they're looking at me and being really, just being judgy, and I'm like,
Right.
hey, I did not come up with this title for myself. Thank you very much. I
Right.
did not want this. But yeah, it was funny. It was a good experience though.
But you walk up to Bill Murray, you say
Yes.
something like, "Oh,
I
aren't
start
you?"
flirting with him.
Yeah.
I'm like,
And then,
oh my gosh, aren't you Bob Harris? I'm such a
but
big
then you
fan
come
of
back
yours.
later and you kind of walk by and tempt him a little bit.
Yeah, so that's the first part, is when I walk by. So I'm coming out of the bathroom. My first scene is I'm coming out of the bathroom. He's talking on the phone to Scarlett Johansson. Like he's on one of the house phones right near the bathrooms, right in the little hall. And so I walk by him, and I'm like, oh, I know who you are. Kind of like recognizing him and flirting just a little with him. And then
Right.
I go and wait, in the elevator, for the elevator. And then that's when he's there. And I'm like, got it. Sexy businesswoman has to go up and say hi.
Right.
Which I did. And
That is too funny.
it was very funny. And what was really cool about that was I got the script, and I remember, when I got on set, Sofia Coppola said, so this is what I want said, but in no way, it doesn't need to be these exact lines. So you can kind of say, as long as this is what you're saying, it could be in whatever way you want to say it.
Right.
And then she said, and just keep talking until he interrupts you. I'm like, oh, okay, no problem.
Right, but I mean, your character does play a kind of an essential role in the film, just because it's not like a bellhop or a taxi driver where it's someone he just has to interact with to kind of bring some realism to the situation of him, like going from one place to another. But you appearing a few times kind of bring this, and I said it before, almost like this temptation to him to maybe go a different direction with his trip. I mean, even in your name, sexy businesswoman, like maybe the idea is, Bill Murray's there just to kind of fool around and move on, but he does go a different direction with the film and has this, I don't really know if it's more like a father-daughter relationship or something, but just like makes this connection with someone on this trip where they both kind of feel lost. And so I think that's really interesting with the part that your character plays, because they wouldn't have just put you in there to put you in there. There's some sort of larger reason to put your character in there to just kind of give an idea of, maybe what he's used to. Maybe this is something that's happened before.
Yeah. And I think maybe the whole thing about around him, he's surrounded by the sponsor, that's there with him, like he's surrounded by this mass of Japanese people, like just all around him. But in that way, I guess I'm kind of almost a taste of home, but not really, because, he doesn't know me or anything like that, but I know him, and I'm there on a business trip too. So maybe that, it does kind of have an interesting, I guess, angle to it. Yeah.
And it's funny with Bill Murray because I have a 4-year-old daughter, and she, for whatever reason, has like really gotten attached to Ghostbusters. And her favorite one is Peter, which is Bill Murray's character.
Yeah.
She likes the cartoon more than the movie, but she's gotten this connection that's Peter, like real Peter, she calls him, because it's in the movie.
Real Peter. Right.
So so it's just kind of funny that as I was putting her to bed tonight, she wanted her Bill Murray action figure to cuddle with. She cuddles with a piece of plastic. So.
And not the real Peter, thank goodness. Yes.
Right. But I just thought that was so funny because I'm like, would she understand who I'm talking to? No, she would not. I don't think she gets that it's an actor and all that. But it's very funny.
That's so cute.
Bill Murray's kind of dominating our life right now.
Yeah.
She said one night, can I look at pictures of him? And so I just brought up a picture of Bill Murray. And she was like, that's Peter. And I was like, yep, all right, good night. You looked at Bill Murray. Go to bed.
Real life Peter. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's such an interesting, he's such an interesting guy because, even now he'll crash weddings all the time and just, start drinking their shots or doing whatever. I love, and when Sofia Coppola wanted to get him for the role, he doesn't have a cell phone, right? So you have to reach out to him by the, fax and, it's just all this stuff. Even for someone like Sofia Coppola, there was a lot of pomp and circumstance that she had to go through kind of basically to get him on board, and he didn't want to do the role for a really long time. He wasn't interested. But one of the things that he said was, if I do it, I want to also be a part in kind of, if I think that he would say it differently, or I want to also be involved in kind of the process. And she was like, yeah, of course I'm gonna let you do that, absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, what a great experience though, and I'm really looking forward to that episode. And if people are just joining us, Liesel has a podcast, Adventures of a Blonde Geisha. You can check that out on most major podcast carriers. You have a website too. It's Adventures of a Blonde Geisha.buzzsprout.com, right?
Yes, Buzzsprout. Yeah. I did. Yeah. So I was, it's kind of interesting because before, a while back, I had a website, I think it was LieselWeapon.com. And, I used the kind of traditional way of GoDaddy, buy the domain, blah, blah, blah. And so when I wanted to do this podcast, I was like, okay, I need to get a domain name and I need to do this. And so I got adventuresofablondegeisha.com. And then I was doing the, I put everything up, kind of made the website. And then I found out that in order to make any kind of changes, you can't use the free plan, apparently, even if you bought the domain. I was like, what? Oh. I didn't even know that. That's kind of... So in other words, if I wanted to upload an episode, I had to have this, $15 a month, marketing plan or blah, blah, blah. And it was interesting for me because I was like, oh, wow, okay. Well, then I don't need a website. And, there have been a few other people that had told me that you don't really need a website. I mean, because you do have, like you said, like the Buzzsprout, I get. And then also I do have a Facebook page as well, Adventures of a Blonde Geisha. And then, of course, I share the episode links and everything on social media. But so people were telling me, I don't think you need that, website. I was like, no, I need it. And then when I found out that I couldn't, make any changes unless I paid them, I was like, yeah, okay, no, I don't need it after all.
Right.
Yeah. So it was a lesson for me, but it's a learning curve, I guess.
Well, yeah, and you're only 2 episodes deep. You're promising guests as well, which I'm sure you are very much looking forward to after your experience here.
Yes. Yeah. I know.
Can I hear you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I know. I hear echo. But actually, though, I have to say, and I think I might have mentioned this in my first episode, but one of my favorite things is actually sitting down with people and interviewing them and getting their stories and kind of hearing all about their journeys. I absolutely love that kind of thing. And I think having done it so much in radio, it's I don't know, it's just one of my favorite things to do. So I really can't wait. Like, I have a lot of people. Now, of course, I'm going to be bringing some of my crew. I'll be bringing in some of the Sega peeps, and I'll also be bringing in some other voice actors who, maybe don't really do that much in the way of coming to events and whatnot. I do want to also bring in Japanese guests as well, but the only thing about that is trying to figure out the language balance, right? So
Right.
So I'm going to wait a little bit, on that. But I also have a lot of really wonderful musicians who, like a good girlfriend of mine, she is the guitarist for Cyndi Lauper, and like a lot of, Sheila E., and like a lot of these people. And, these are really good friends of mine, and and I met them in Japan. So they have a very interesting perspective on Japan as well. So I want to bring them in and kind of get their Japan and compare it with mine,
Yeah.
And also some people who I grew up with, who have very different stories, in this whole third culture kid, as we call it, which I think it's really interesting to me because, and I do talk a little bit about this in the podcast, but growing up as a third culture kid, where your parents are from one culture, you live in another culture, you create your own culture. We all have slightly different cultures that we've created, and sometimes there is that there's overlapping, but like a lot of the people that I grew up with, some of them don't speak Japanese or don't speak very much English. Like, they don't use English that much anymore. And so I want to bring on other people who've had a similar experience, but a very different journey, right? So, yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that. And that's what kind of caught me by surprise, because when I saw that you were doing the podcast, I thought, well, what would she talk about? Would it be more, would it be a drier take on, this is what I've done and this is some professional advice from me? But it's a lot more personal, and that's an aspect I've never really thought about because it's not something I've experienced personally. So I'm really looking forward to that. Speaking of guests, now you shared in the past, and I brought up, Brian Burton Lewis. Have you, is there any chance, because I know very tough to get a hold of, very little information about his work on the Crazy Taxi games. Yeah. Is there any chance
that I have any okay, so it's interesting that you bring that up, Barry, because I was actually going to talk a little bit about, I don't know if I mentioned this when you interviewed me in 2015, but I know Brian from when we were little kids. Did I ever tell you this?
You babysat him.
Correct. Exactly.
Right.
Yes, I babysat him. Right. So, so it was, I didn't even, I've known, we went to school together, and I had to babysit for him, and he was a bit of an ornery kid, and I always hated babysitting for him because he was always getting into trouble.
And for people listening, Brian, he did the voice of the system voice and Axel and some customers, so he's the one going, hey, come on over, have some fun, Crazy Taxi, that whole situation. So I can imagine he was a handful just based on the voice.
And actually that the system voice, like that voice in Crazy Taxi, is so him. It's very high. He's very high energy. He's very kind of like all over the place, and but that's also what's great about him is he doesn't do though that much in the way of voice acting anymore. I think that was really more something where we were working together because we were recruited. I was at that time I was working in radio at J-Wave, and his boss brought the company that was managing Brian, his management company, is owned by a very good friend of mine at J-Wave. And so they brought us on for that project because of the whole Radio Connect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but I know that he's been doing, he's been doing a lot of work with DJing, and he really loves going to events and, doing like the raves and whatnot.
Oh, wow.
So I think that's been something that he really does. And, he's so high energy, and I know that he's calmed down a little bit because he has kids. So I think that's kind of,
Right. You think though he'll be shouting at them in the voice like, hey, come on over, drink your milk, something like that.
It could be, but if they were like him, they'll probably give him an attitude, be like,
yeah,
you
probably.
don't care, won't care. Yeah, exactly.
Probably.
We're not listening to you anyway, Dad. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for the intro to this show, I emulate his voice for a little clip. And to record it, I tried it where I'm sitting here, and I just blew out the microphone. So I had to go to the back of the room and shout it. So I can only imagine his recording session was people messing with the levels quite a bit, so it didn't just blow out the speakers. But I would say he's probably one of the most iconic, like a system voice you probably would find in video gaming just as a whole. There's very few I can think of outside of that, except maybe like some of the Midway games, but it's so if there's any chance of him coming on, that would be fantastic, because he's an enigma to a lot of Sega fans. Now, speaking of events that people can find you at, I believe you are now locked in as a guest at Sonic and Sega Fan Jam.
Yes, I'm very excited about that. And
yes,
what's super exciting is Eric Kelso's could be coming, and he has never been to an event before.
Wow.
Because they don't have they don't have like these kind of anime conventions, or like the Comic-Cons, like stuff like that. They don't have that. They just don't have it in Japan, really. I mean, they do have a Tokyo Comic-Con in December, but they don't. It's just a very different event culture. So he is so excited to come over and finally get to interact with people, with Sega fans, and I'm super excited because Eric is actually one of my favorite people. In fact, he kind of going back to Lost in Translation, but the first time I ever saw Lost in Translation was actually with Eric. I was given a copy of the movie and I hadn't seen it yet, and so I was like, do you want to watch it with me? I don't want to watch it by myself. So he actually so I love, it's gonna be so great to have him at the event.
That's awesome. I'm hoping to make my way out there.
That would be great.
That would be really fun. Patrick, who actually puts on the event, he is a writer for SEGAbits. SEGAbits was kind of the springboard for the convention. And actually, the very first time he did it, he was like, I want to do a convention, but I'm tired of all these Sonic conventions. I want to have it be a broader one. And I was talking to him, and I was like, well, dude, you got to put Sonic in the title because it brings people through the door. And so I was like, why don't you there's Sonic Jams, a game. I was like, do like Fan Jam, Sonic and Sega Fan Jam. So I actually named the convention, which is kind of funny.
I love it.
So I feel like I named the thing. I should be able to go at some point. So maybe dress as a king and walk through, and this is all thanks to me. Patrick did nothing. No. But I think it's long overdue, and I'm itching to go to conventions. So I'm really hoping to make my way out to that. I'm talking to him about if I can be involved in some capacity, I'd love to like host a panel because I love talking to people.
Yes.
So
yes, or maybe even having, a live version of SEGAbits there with with Eric and me,
it's been too long since a actual live event pertaining to video games. So I'm fingers crossed I can make it out. I'm really hoping to. But that's really cool that I did not know that Eric, that's his first convention. I think I have his autograph through like some Shenmue Kickstarter magazine. I think he threw his little glossy in there. So that's really cool. Speaking of glossies, actually, glad I didn't forget these. So on our previous episode, our guest was actually a printer. And so we did a live demonstration of a printer that Sega released in the mid-90s. And it had, I think no video exists online until now because we actually used it live. And there was a Virtua Fighter cartridge that came with it. And so our second or third test print was this. I don't know if you can see it, but it's Sarah Bryant in a bikini from like circa 1993. It's so pixelated and blown out, and half of it didn't print well, but it's so funny. It's like the rarest piece of Sarah Bryant merchandise because you need to have the printer and it needs to work and you need to have the cartridge. So when I printed that out, I was like, oh, she's coming on the show in 2 weeks. So that's kind of fun.
So funny.
Little connection there. But since you have had an experience in living in Japan, what years were you there, by the way, in your childhood? I'm just curious.
So many years. I was there from when I was 5 until for about 30 years.
Okay. So you were there in the 90s, I'd presume?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 80s.
Okay, so
late 70s, 80s, and 90s, and 2000s. Yeah.
So when we were doing this printer thing, we were like, this is such a strange item because it only prints little glossy photos. It does 30 at a time, and it really had this like photo booth kind of mentality behind it, where it's like, hook up your camcorder, take your picture. Now you were, I guess, kind of a youth or younger at the time.
Yeah.
Kind of plugged into this stuff. Was there sort of something going on in the 90s with the Japanese, with technology that would make like a printer that hooks up to your video game console? Like
that could be connected to Purikura, which is print club, is what they called it. And I was very much into that. Like this is, I mean, it's one of the, like one of those photo booths that you find in like the mall. And,
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so it's similar to that concept, only of course, as the Japanese do, there's all kinds of fabulous filters. And you can get one that says happy or like BFFs or, I mean,
right.
probably not BFFs because Japanese don't really use that term, but stuff like that, like happy friends or.
Now, do you know, because I think the spokesman they had for this was Johnny's Jr. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Who were they?
So Johnny's is one of the biggest, they're one of the biggest talent agencies in Japan as far as pop music. Like they are in charge of Arashi, they're in charge of SMAP. Like they are a J-pop music machine. And so I'm imagining that Johnny's put this together because obviously there are a lot of screaming girls who want to have a filter with them and their favorite boy or boy band.
Okay.
So yeah, everyone was on board that train. I mean, I remember even, like I would be, after I finish, with radio, a lot of times when I would have people on my show, like interviewing them, I would take them out to like Roppongi, which is an area where a lot of the clubs were and everything. So I'd take them out, right? And I remember doing a print club or Purikura with Jamie Foxx because excuse me, because I was like, we have to, because we went out dancing, and it's like, and they're all over the place, so it's really easy to get. But they, like we did these. Unfortunately, I don't have them anymore, which is really, really, saddens me, because it would have been so much fun to keep those. But I would do it with people I didn't even know very well, who I just met. I'm like, oh, let's go in the booth and do this filter, and they're like, what am I doing here?
Okay, so that gives it a little more sense as to why they would have done something like that. It's such a strange piece of tech. So thank you. Yeah, because I was like, well, I know someone who was there at the time.
Yeah, and it was the rage, totally. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna play around with it again, because there are ways you can frame your face and then like put Virtua Fighter characters around it. So I'm gonna.
Oh yes.
I'm gonna see if I can actually get that working. But it's such a strange little thing from Sega's past. So before we wrap things up, I had a few questions from our Patreon audience. Yes. These are people that are crazy enough to throw a couple bucks a month at me for doing this show. So. Yay! So if you ever want to do a Patreon for your show, consider it.
Yeah, I know. I am.
It's fun.
To it for sure. But I still only have 2 episodes, so I've got a little ways to go. But
that's true. Yeah, that's true. So the first one we have is from Daniel Andres, and he wanted to know, and we discussed Joy a lot in our previous show from some years ago. But he wanted to know what it was like getting to know the cast members for the first time. And if I can expand on that, would you say it was on kind of like the fan circuit that you got to know them even better than you did working on the project? Like, did you share the studio with them at all, or was it separate?
We did. I worked with some of the characters. So I did work with Eric and Corey. Mm-hmm. I did work with Corey a lot. And then sometimes it would be me, Corey, and Eric that would work together. So there was opportunities for us to kind of work together. Now, Corey I had never met before Shenmue, but Eric, I knew him from doing a lot of other work together. And, there are and then Paul Lucas, who does Landy. I knew him really well from other work, so I know him, I knew his wife and his family, so
oh, wow. You could have killed Landy and ended it, but look what you did. You got to know his family.
I know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So would you say you got to know them more over the years? I know, for example, Eric Kelso, you've teamed up with on a few things, I think virtually maybe. But that's really cool. I'm glad you guys were all together.
Yeah, and Paul is another one where he's just like such a wonderful friend, and then he actually left Japan and went to Singapore. And so we kind of, there's also this thing where then I moved here to the U.S. and of course Corey was already here, but
right.
So we kind of lost, touch with each other for quite a while. And then when that Kickstarter happened at E3, when that was announced, all of a sudden we were doing, some interviews and whatnot, and I can't even begin to tell you how full my heart was to be able to get back with them and do these interviews. And it was so fun because it felt in a way like excuse me, like we had obviously there'd been years that had passed and
mm-hmm.
We'd all gotten older, but in many ways it was almost like going back to that same vibe from years back when we were working on the game. So it's always a lot of fun to be able to, anytime that I get to do an interview or, with Twitch or something like that, and, go on Corey's stream, or it's always a lot of fun. Yeah. It just brings back a lot of fond memories for me.
That's awesome. And I was so glad that you returned for 3. Was that done
Yeah.
remotely, or did you go just run into a local studio? How did that work out?
I went into the studio where they were recording, which was in Burbank.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so I was brought in for that.
I really like that. That was for the phone call, I believe, right, where he's
Yes.
reconnecting with his old friends, and that's one of the things I love about Shenmue is like you get the game, it introduces some characters that you fall in love with, and then he just moves on. And I think for someone like yourself who has been, maybe not constantly moving, but you have made some major moves where you leave people behind and they really define your time there and kind of shaped you, that Shenmue is kind of like a virtual long distance move sometimes, because you're going to the next game, you're like, gosh, I miss those characters, But I'm so glad that you were able to return. Next question, next and last question we have here is from Nicholas Schaefer. He says, today it seems, he's getting a little controversial, it seems like people are criticizing how female characters were represented in the 90s and 2000s. Do you like how your characters are portrayed, and is there anything about them that you would change?
No, because I think that's so easy. It's so easy to, I don't know. I feel like it's really easy to look back and be critical of things. And I know that that's going on with a lot of things, and I completely understand that. But I don't think I wouldn't change things. I just don't believe, and this is not just about this particular question, but we get this kind of question a lot with voice acting. It's like, oh, if you could change, would you change, would you make any changes, whatever? And I just always say I wouldn't, because I don't know. I just feel like that things happened the way they happened, and I'm not gonna look back. If I were to do it now, would I do it differently? Yes, but I'm not gonna be critical of what happened back in the day.
Right.
I don't know. It's a hard thing, and I understand, and that question gets brought up sometimes, and then of course the whole thing about like women in voice acting, and like the outfits and all this and all that.
It's tricky, because I think there is a lot of focus on female characters in video games, but there's also, you look at male characters in video games. Just recently, I think Street Fighter 6 debuted, and it was just like the biggest, hunkiest, burliest man ever. He looked like a block of cheese, like he was just massive. And so, I have to wonder if it's kind of going both. I think both genders just kind of see that in video games, and I don't really think it's changed. I think if anything, it's been amplified almost to the extreme with games like Bayonetta and a lot of the fighting games now. I think it's actually kind of unique with Virtua Fighter that they still keep things a little grounded, and the characters still appear a little more realistic than kind of super stylized, over the top, hypersexual or something like that for both genders. So it's because really it's a core fighting game. I think a lot of the fans are ones who are not looking for something over the top, but they're just like the move sets and things like that, and the characters' voices are kind of like the icing on the cake. So that's but if you were to return for like a 6th game for Virtua Fighter, would you want to see like almost like a time jump, like the characters, or would you prefer, like if you were hired, would you be a little more comfortable with it just seeming like you're picking up right where you left off? The character hasn't aged maybe more than a year. Like what would you prefer? Would you want to see a Sarah who's aged?
I have no idea. I'm open to whatever. Like, I think that it would depend maybe on, like if it's going to be like more story driven, or, it would kind of depend on a lot of aspects, I think, of the game. Yeah. And I would be open to whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I have a preference really necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, I really want to thank you so much for coming on, for being a good sport about the beginning. I apologize, but that's the live show. That's why I slapped live on the title. I knew this coming into it.
Yeah. And also, I don't know, is your so my computer, my laptop has been frozen. Like the screens have been frozen this whole time.
Oh, wow. No, you're coming through just
FYI.
fine.
Okay, good.
That's why you were going, I'm looking at something. See, you're a great actor.
Yeah. I was like, I see nothing. Even I'm frozen. I'm like,
oh, no,
okay.
no, you're coming in fine. So that's great. That's good.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, if people want to see you in person, fall 2022, Atlanta, Georgia, Sonic and Sega Fan Jam Remix is coming from our good friend Patrick. And then, of course, I mentioned it in the middle, and I'm going to close with it, Adventures of a Blonde Geisha, fantastic podcast, really... It's fun. It's like having a friend call you and they just talk and don't let you say anything. But I'm in the car a little bit, each day, and so I really liked putting it on and just hearing your story. And I'm really excited for future installments. When can people expect the next episode to drop? And what will it be about?
Yeah, it'll be the next one will come out on Sundays. So it's gonna be every 2 weeks. Sunday night. And the next one is going to be called My J-Pop Culture. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the influences I had growing up. Like and I once more kind of touch on the whole, my pop culture is a hodgepodge of Western culture or American culture and J-pop culture. So I'm going to go into some of the things that really influenced me in a lot of different ways. In my life, really. So it'll be called My J-Pop Culture. And I did see that, the chat asked if it was going to be available on YouTube. And that's one thing that I still haven't been able to figure it out, but I do have a YouTube channel. So I'm going to put it on there. I just haven't figured out how to do that yet. It's a learning curve, people. It's a learning curve.
If you need any help with that, just feel free to DM. It's something I do constantly. So.
Oh, thanks, Barry. I probably will, because I kid you not, I spent like a couple hours, and I'm like, I hate you, YouTube. I don't understand. Oh my god.
Oh boy. But you're much calmer on your podcast.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's because, I'm in this like pretzel twister position in my small little studio.
Right.
And then right outside the door, I have my cat like yelling at me.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Well, I very much look forward to future shows. I very much look forward to in-person events.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, Liesel, thank you so much for coming back on, touching base, talking Virtua Fighter, Shenmue, and all things Blonde Geisha. So again, check that out. Subscribe. Give the 5 stars. It means a lot to her. So she earned it. So oh boy. So without further ado, I'm Barry. Thank you so much, Liesel, for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye.